And so I just want to take a brief moment to thank you guys all for your continued support in us. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you all. And that being said, I can't think of a better guest to have on our show to cap off this experience than Daniel Mercer, the co-founder and CEO of COOP Ale Works. So yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're absolutely pleased to have you on the show. So I've got a few notes here, but I'd love for you to fill in the blanks if you don't mind. You've got 10 years of experience investing with finance and entrepreneurial ventures. You had a stint with I2E as well. You've been an officer in the United States Air Force. And based on my Google creeping that I'm able to do and my tours of your brewery, you have a heart for dogs.
I do, indeed. I have a big heart for at least one dog, and then a smaller heart for all the rest of them, basically. So,
do count.
Yeah, I think for me personally, everybody, I think, growing up, if you had dogs, you have a life experience with your pet. And then, for me in my mid-20s, I had some significant shifts in my life that were pretty critical for me, and kind of personally in my personal evolution. And having a dog there during big crises and big growth points and big successes in your personal life is always exciting. But it's always been my goal, since then, just to try to not be in a position without a dog. And it haven't always been in a place in my life where I have had the capability to have a pet, but now things have the bow is back kind of into the water. And so we have a Walker Coonhound that I found 10 years ago, a couple months ago, and he's become a pretty integral part of our lives and a pretty integral part of the brewery. I guess if you've ever been to the brewery or the anniversary party, you've probably seen him raging around trying to find bits of food from the food trucks and whatnot. He's not a very big fan of beer at all, but definitely is a fan of food. So, and when we founded the brewery, one of the things we wanted to focus on was, what is our philanthropic focus? Where are we going to establish ourselves, and what are we going to take that is a passion of our own and kind of integrate into our business? And the biggest thing was pet welfare, and myself and one of the other founders had pugs at some point in our lives, and so that was a common thread, and so pet welfare became a big focal point for us. We didn't really know how to implement it, and at the same time the Humane Society was getting on their feet, and so things kind of coincided and merged. And at our first anniversary party and every subsequent anniversary party, we've raised money for the Humane Society, and so they've become a pretty integral part of our existence. They bring us puppies to play with every month and a half or so. I missed the last one, it was Friday, but yeah, so dogs are definitely a big part of my life and part of the brewery.
So and as a tribute to you, I wore my dog socks today.
Oh, those are nice.
Yeah.
They look like hounds too.
Yeah, so that's...
Don't tell my wife.
Well, we'll have to get you a pair. Yeah. You have quite an eclectic background. It seems like you made quite a pivot from your venture background and going straight into a brewery, which it typically seems like people evolve from a hobby brewer into more of a commercial brewer, and you just went full tilt from... Did you have personal brewing experience before that, or...?
I didn't. We started the brewery, there were three of us who started the company, and one of the guys, Mark Seibold, had been a home brewer for about 3 or 4 years. And he and JD had met through some architecture circles a few months earlier, and then he and I met at the lake, just happenstance, sailing at Lake Hefner. Just happens to be the same night I met my wife, so it was a fortuitous night,
Stars
I guess.
were aligned.
Yeah. But Mark had been homebrewing for a while, and really we gathered around the concept of, really the fact that there wasn't a craft brewery or production brewery in Oklahoma City. There were brew pubs, and at the time with 3-2 beer laws, it was fairly restrictive in what you could do or what opportunities were afforded you if you were to start a full-size production scale strong beer brewery. And so really at the onset, the fascination, at least for me as a very minor partner early on, was in the concept of a nascent industry, and that really dovetailed with where I had cut my teeth to that point in my career for that, those 6 or so years in my 20s. And my big contribution, if you will, and my desire was to help build a plan and vet the research and kind of do some of the background foundational work to determine if this was something that was sustainable. Could we actually sustain a production brewery in a 3-2 limited beer environment? And so no, I was not a brewer. If you were to give me a homebrew system consisting of an igloo cooler as a mash tun and a screen bed and a burner and a turkey fryer and a pot, yeah, I can brew a batch of beer, but and I can bottle it, but it's been a long time. It probably wouldn't be stellar. And I definitely could not brew you anything on the production systems that we have in the current facility. And so that's historically not where my expertise has been and where my desire has been. And we've been lucky enough throughout our existence to have really talented people on the brewing side as part of our team. So it's not really been necessary for me to get involved.
So how has your non-brewing I'll try to say that 3 times fast. Non-brewing background helped you with your brewing company?
That's what sets us apart, I think, from most breweries and I would say it sets us apart from 95% potentially of breweries out there. There are a lot of breweries now in the United States. In 2006, when we started thinking about this, there were about 1,300, and now there are over 7,000. And that spells all kinds of complications for the market. But really at the core for us is when we started this thing, if I was going to be a part of it, I wanted to ensure that my founding partners were interested in running this thing as a business and not a hobby. And I really didn't have the time or interest in hobbies. I had other hobbies that I was more passionate about. And so
sailing, dogs, your new girlfriend.
Right. A few of those, yeah. And so for me, starting off, when you look at the brewing landscape, you see a lot of brewers, and all the poster children breweries like Sierra Nevada and Sam Adams and New Belgium and Russian River, Great Divide, all these other breweries that you're familiar with that are great success stories that were founded in the 80s and 90s, they were all founded by brewers. I mean, Dick and Eric at Left Hand were brewers. They were trained engineers who got engineering degrees from the Air Force Academy and knocked their Air Force stint out and then started Left Hand. But Eric and Dick were both very passionate about beer, and they knew the brewing science behind everything. And we had that talent with Mark in our founding base, but we're very different in that from day one, we've treated this thing like a business, and it's run very methodically. And a lot of people, and I think in the industry, I am at least, and us to some extent are a little bit of outcasts in that sense. I am definitely a huge outcast in the brewing business because I'm not a brewer. That's not my forte, and almost every other brewery was founded by brewers. And I now being the only remaining founder left in the business, I steer the ship, but I'm not the brewer, and that makes me a little bit of an odd duck in the brewing space. But my background in business and finance has given me a better sight picture and a better capability to align our pathway over time to make us successful, I think. And that's what really, at the end of the day, makes us different than most other breweries in our competitive set is we have been a business from day one. We don't treat the brewing sciences with any less respect. And frankly, I would argue that we treat the brewing sciences with more respect than most of our peers, but that's not where my expertise rests, and that's not where I'm working. That's where we have 35 full-time staff, and we have a microbiologist and then another lab tech and multiple brewers, and we just made a hire for, as far as I know, the only UC Davis brewing program educated brewer in Oklahoma who will come on board to our team in June. And we take the sciences very seriously, but at the heart we also treat this very much like a business. And that doesn't come naturally for most people, and it doesn't come naturally for people who think they're signing on to a brewery, frankly. And so when we bring new people on board to the business, even in the recruiting process, we make it a very, very defined exercise to show them that this is a business at the heart of everything. Every business has a fundamental purpose, and that's another conversation, but we have a fundamental purpose as a business, but we have this intrinsic purpose that we've created, and that's where we align ourselves with a lot of the things, the soft goods that people find very interesting, like the liquid and the social engagement and the philanthropy and what you're doing around this beautiful product that you're creating. But we are a little bit different in that sense.
So you kind of hit I think a sweet spot for most entrepreneurs that are typically seen as kind of the odd crayon in the box, or the eccentric, or kind of the odd man out. It seems like you guys have really embraced that as potentially being a business before brewing, or more business at the heart of the brewery. How else has maybe embracing this non-traditional brewing sense helped you guys?
Sure. I think one of the best ways and one of the best things that we've done to prepare ourselves for success has been having financial acumen in the business. And obviously that's my background, but now we have a leadership team and we've got management staff that, whether it's something that I've instilled in them and mentored them through, or something that they brought to our business from a prior career, financial sense is a big deal. It's allowed us to survive things that I frankly think a lot of other breweries and a lot of other management teams would have never survived in this business. In addition to that, having just generally an awareness and skill sets that are outside of this tunnel vision, frankly, has just set us up to hire the right people, give us the right mindset to hire people who are smarter than we are at times. That's a constant pursuit that I try to instill on anybody that has hiring authority in our organization. That's really 3 other individuals. But getting the right people on board and making sure they understand where we're going has been a big deal. It's also allowed us, I think, to avoid some pitfalls that brewers often fall into, around, whether that's around chasing trends or around pursuing, whether it's a package, a beer style, a marketing scheme, or something like that isn't necessarily aligned with general business principles and practices and pathways to success. I think a lot of brewers, they fall victim to whether it's a trend or more often their own instincts. And instincts are great when you act on them and they pan out like you think they will, but there are a lot of other compounding forces outside of your control that are going to influence whether you come out of this thing ahead or whether you drown in it. And I think we've avoided some pitfalls. We are very methodical around production volumes, and we're not expanding our business based on what we've seen in the past 10 years. And if any of you are familiar with the beer business or innately familiar with the craft beer business regionally, particularly in the past 24 months, there have been some really big names go under in the brewing business. I mean, Green Flash was one of the biggest inspirations for F5, which is now the best-selling beer in Oklahoma, or the best-selling craft beer in Oklahoma, and it sells more than Sam Adams and Sierra Nevada and all of those things. But Green Flash West Coast style IPA was, that was the beer that set our head brewer Blake on fire about making something like F5. And Green Flash went bankrupt last year because they were in a 40-state territory. They had been growing through the aughts and the teens, and then well into the double digits, and they made some pretty massive expansions, and they pushed out a territorial pursuit that was laden with sales reps that cost money and distributor relationships that cost money to fund, and they eventually were overwhelmed, and they were sunk by the competitive set. When I talked about 7,000 breweries being in the U.S., there are a lot of dynamics at the shelf and amongst consumer behavior that are driving breweries' performance now. It's not all just, hey, let's make this liquid, someone will buy it. That used to be the case, and that's not really the case anymore. So setting foundations around strategic growth and strategic market entry, where we want to bring our brand territorially. We're in 6 states. We don't have any plans to go anywhere else. We used to have this vision of covering every state between the Rockies and the Mississippi.
But you've made a very intentional decision to maintain a regional focus, predominantly on Oklahoma and the contingent states.
Right.
So how, Maybe that's another one of your outlier stories, but also what made you focus specifically on this region other than just location of your brewery?
Originally, it was necessity. You know, when we were in the, how many of you have been to the original brewery at 51st and 51st and Western next to the Speakeasy? Okay, a few of you. We started in this 5,000 square foot metal shack with a 7-barrel brew house that was 30 years old. It was Santa Fe Brewing's first Ska Brewing's first brew house. It was made by a dude in his garage in 1989, a guy named John Cook. It was a scary device. And then a bunch of used equipment, and we had mold everywhere and just this horrendous facility. But in that facility, we were constantly butting up against this production capacity. And we would go buy a new tank, which immediately when you buy a fermenter, that gives you the capability to produce more liquid or ferment more liquid, as long as you can keep up on the brew house side. And we kept butting up against this thing. And then we introduced F5 a year and a half after we started, and it exploded. But at the same time, while it was exploding, we started canning beer, and our best sellers were Horny Toad and Native Amber. And thank God we didn't start canning F5 out the gate, because it would have buried us. And so we're canning Native Amber and Horny Toad on this one-head canning line, or this two-head canning line, by hand, really. I mean, if you've been in our current facility, it's a big whiz-bang Italian machine that cranks out 240 cans a minute. In the old place, it was like 20 cases an hour with 4 people. Lid. It was horrible. But we were pretty capacity stricken. We were undercapitalized, and we didn't have the capabilities to supply enough F5 to the market on draft, much less introduce it in cans, much less even think about going to another state, which was just nowhere on our radar to begin with. So we canned F5, or we canned Native Amber and Horny Toad, and we kegged F5 and all these other brands, none of them are which are currently represented here, but DNR, Elevator Wheat, which used to be Zeppelin, Grand Sport Porter, and some other brands that are still with us. But it was a struggle just to fulfill the Oklahoma market, because we were growing in the triple digits every year for some number of consecutive years.
Impressive.
And then we didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity, or frankly the know-how. I mean, we were really lucky early on. We have always had a mental and internally dictated focus on quality and consistency, but the systems that we brewed with at the 51st Street location were horrendous. And the fact that we came out of that facility without 10 times as much infection as we did, or lost beer, is a wonder. I don't know, like Ninkasi and the brewing gods were watching over us, but sanitize. Those are the keys to homebrewing if you ever become a homebrewer. But
so you started out of a kind of a necessity, and you've probably have the ability to expand if you wanted to more of a national presence, but you still decided to remain regional.
We have, and moving to the new facility in 2014 was a very planned exercise. I quit my day job in February of 2012, and it was just time for me to migrate. It was where I could afford to take a pay cut, and the brewery could afford to pay me something. It was just time to move, and we'd had a partner exit, and Mark was the home brewer in the group, and so the operational lead fell immediately on me. And I've got a pretty mechanical mind and a tinkering mind. I don't know how to brew on the big system, but I can tell you how every piece of equipment in the building works, and what it costs, and what mechanical componentry it has, and how it got put together, because I've built a lot of it. But that I find a lot of satisfaction in those things, but that's not where my greatest value is. And so over time, I don't really touch those things much anymore, unfortunately. But in moving to the new facility, our goal was to get the physical space and allow ourselves to place these systems in the space that would help us build a regional brand, right? And go to this Rockies to the Mississippi footprint. But all the while that was happening, there was a pretty massive explosion of the number of breweries in the US between 2014 and now. And so in 2015, when we move into the new facility, the first thing we did was can enough Native Amber and Horny Toad to fill our back orders, and then start canning F5, which was the behemoth, right? So we start canning F5 with our new canning line that goes a whopping 35 cans a minute, which is about 90 cases an hour. Our current line is about 90 cases every 11 minutes, by the way. So we have this 90 case an hour system that we thought was a game changer, and it was. But now we can can F5, right? And we can can Grand Sport Porter and DNR and all these other beers that we had year round on draft. And so we fulfilled the Oklahoma market over a period of about a year and a half. And then it was time to start looking. We had already been looking. We had been getting inquiries from other states and distributors, say, bring your beer to Colorado, bring your beer to Arkansas, to Massachusetts, to, Ukraine, whatever. And
we have a Ukrainian in here?
Do you have a Ukrainian in here? By the way, who's watching the Chernobyl thing on HBO? I haven't seen it, but Chernobyl is the most fascinating place on the planet I have ever visited, by the way. So
Pripyat?
Yeah, Pripyat, it's the most surreal thing. Apparently now it's overridden with
We can
tourists.
talk about that after the show, too. I just finished it. That's what I'm saying.
So let's do, because I don't have HBO. So we fill out our bucket, right? We fill this bucket in Oklahoma, and then we start evaluating states. What's the greatest state next to Oklahoma? Like, where could we sell the most beer? It's very obvious, right? But it's also 8 million people, or 12 million people, 27, I don't know. It's millions and millions and billions and billions.
It's bigger every day.
Yeah, 27 million people, I think is right. And there are 3 million people in Oklahoma, and we thought, we don't need to go jump into Texas. Let's go jump into Arkansas, because it's backwards, and they don't, they don't drink a whole lot of beer. Backwards like Oklahoma, yeah. But it's
okay. We can edit that out.
I love Arkansas, by the way. Arkansas is one of my favorite places to visit. But it's a small state, and we could get our feet wet. And frankly, about half of the state is dry. I mean, that's what I meant by backwards in the law sense. Just like Oklahoma with 3-2 beer, and Oklahoma still had dry counties. Arkansas is one of those states where only literally half of the state can physically purchase beer in their counties. So that was the smallest state that we could really enter. And we had a distributor there, a young group of guys that started a craft beer distributor, and they had been talking to us for a while, so we started selling beer there.
What is it like trying to copy-paste your business plan into another state? Like, what type of compliance issues do you have to deal with, or what type of things do you evaluate when you're deciding moving into new territory?
We evaluate different things now than we used to, and we're not doing really any new territories. But as far as the regulatory component goes, you have state and federal regulators in every aspect of alcohol, basically. And so the state is the federal level is the TTB, the Tax and Trade Bureau, which is a division of the Treasury, used to be under the ATF. And they regulate your brewer's permit, like the permit that allows you to own a site and actually brew beer or distill liquor or make wine. So there are really 3 different license types: distilleries, wineries, and breweries. And then at the state level, really, you also have that same licensure, but you also have some licensure around how distribution works. So in most states, virtually every state except for Oklahoma until October of this past year, you have geographically assigned franchise territories where you say, as a manufacturer, I'm going to sell my product to you, Jim Bob's distribution company, and you're going to sell it in this specific 7-county area, and you're going to be the only one that sells my product. That's the way it is in the rest of the civilized world, but it was never like that in Oklahoma until 2018. And so you go basically trying to scout and or be recruited by or pitch your product to this distributor who has now 7,000 other breweries knocking on their door trying to sell them product. And so the mechanics of getting a distribution partner 5-6 years ago were a lot different than they are now. Now you have distributors who just can't physically take on any more brands. That's the biggest problem in beer today. And that's the reason why the majority of breweries that start today will never see the light of 5,000 or 10,000 barrels in annual production, is because there are no distribution channels for them to take their beer to. Luckily, we have a 6-state footprint that we're established in, and we've got a kind of a foothold in those areas, and we don't have to fight for distribution. But you go kind of make a pitch, basically. I've sat down in 6 different states amongst boards of directors and head buyers and executives at different distribution companies, with a PowerPoint and liquid, going through why our brand is different than the other 5,300 breweries or 6,700 breweries or 7,600 breweries over time as the crowd got bigger and bigger. And one of the biggest things that we differentiate ourselves on to distributors, who are all very smart people and have typically been in the distribution business for generations, is that we have business acumen and that we treat this thing like a business, which is one of the things. That's not something that we go out and broadcast to the public. It's not on our Facebook page. You won't find it in talks that I give to the Oklahoma City Rotary, but you'll see it in this environment because I know everybody here is interested in the business aspect of any industry. And so, and we've made a lot of headway, and we've had a lot of heads going, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I see that.
So on that note, you differentiate yourself from other brewers in these meetings by emphasizing your business acumen. When you're pitching and you're sharing your deck with these distributors, how does this compare to maybe an entrepreneur sharing their pitch deck with a VC or someone else or a customer or something like that?
That's a really good corollary, because corollary the right word? I think so.
Correlation?
Correlation, yeah. I've tried to use the word corollary several times.
Corollary.
Anyway.
Let's make it work.
Let's make it a word. So it's actually a very similar path in that, when you're making a pitch to an investor, you've got a value proposition, and you've got a value proposition to the public or your consumer base or your buyer, but you've also got a value proposition to this investor in that they are going to see some return out of your deal. A distributor is no different. They're going to physically invest capital in your brand in the market, and what the public doesn't see is that for every case of beer or case equivalent, which is 2.25 gallons, that, let's say, Fisher 59, which is our distributor in the Denton County area in Texas, for every case of beer that they sell of ours, we put in a dollar figure and they put in a dollar figure. It's split 50-50. So all the marketing activities, all those signs that you see printed, every festival that we go to, every concert sponsorship, all these different things that you see in beer advertising, that all costs money, and it's typically covered 50-50 between the distributor and the manufacturer. So that didn't happen in Oklahoma prior to October of this past year, by the way, but that's another conversation. But they're actually making an investment in your product. So you've got to pitch to them, number one, why your product's different. And our biggest selling point, our biggest capable point, is our liquid. And we have focused so much on quality and consistency that we believe we have a superior liquid. A lot of breweries say that. There are 7,000 breweries that will tell you that, but I think everybody in this room knows that that's not really the case. Every one of you has drank bad beer in your life. So in that pitch, you've got to prove to them that the consumer is going to buy it, just like you have to prove that the consumer is going to buy your widget or your software package or your subscription-based, hosting service or something like that. Yeah. And then you've got to prove that you can compete in the market, and you've got to prove that you can compete economically and that you have the economies of scale and the efficiencies and the capabilities to continue to provide product. What if, Dallas, Texas explodes and we sell 3 times as much volume next year? That's a question a distributor is going to ask you, and that's a question as a manufacturer of a widget, you have to go, oh, well, yeah, I need to be prepared for a distribution partner that can take my widget into 4,000 retail channels in the United States or internationally. What if that happens, and Walmart takes my product on, whether it's a widget or a beer? The distributor wants to know, do you have the capacity to do this? Do you have the expertise to run multiple turns on a fermenter without CIPing the fermenter in between? And can you ensure that you don't have microbial infection between the turns if you're running the same beer into the same tank? And so,
for those that don't know what CIPing a fermenter means.
CIPing is clean in place. It's basically recirculating acids and caustics and sanitizers through the tank to clean it. Dirty science in the business is that, typically people a lot of times will ask, you have this one fermenter. We have 16 fermenters or something like that in the building. John, how many fermenters do we have? I don't know. You probably know better than I do. 6, and we have 12. And so 14 now. So you will brew, say, Horny Toad into this fermenter, and it's done brewing. You suck the liquid out and you go put it in cans and kegs. Well, now you've got this kind of foam and some other liquid left over. Chances are that if you can keep the tank purged and clean, then you can put Horny Toad right back into that tank without running it through a full cycle of CIP. Typically, we might do that once. We would never take Horny Toad and stick it into a tank that used to have Grand Sport Porter in it, which is a dark, opaque porter, right? But if we had an F5 tank, we might put F5 in it, or we might put Horny Toad back into it. We won't do that more than once or twice because we don't like the risk, but we also have a full-blown lab with 6 figures worth of instrumentation and 2 full-time scientists on staff who are going to every point of inflection in the brewery every day, to every tank, to every bit of liquid, and testing all that liquid on scopes and qPCR machines to make, and ETPs or ATPs to make sure we don't have any live organic bacterial things going on. And if we decide that a process we have isn't working, then we'll change the protocol around that process. But anyhow, that's what CIP is.
Great. So you mentioned something earlier about outgrowing your capacity and for the distributor to, for you to win the distributor's trust, they want to know that you can scale with them if there's a boom that happens. Is that what maybe has played into you guys looking at this new armory project?
It has played into it a little bit. So our current facility, if you don't know, is on Southwest 44th and Council near Western Heights High School. It's just off Airport Road and Council. And we moved over there in 2014 with the objective of, again, building that regional platform. But we knew all along, if you walk in the building now, you'll see 14 fermenters and 12 fermenters inside, 2 outside. And every single fermenter that's there was planned prior to us even having access to the building and signing the lease. We floor planned all of this. We knew exactly where we were going to put everything. And we knew what kind of capacity we could get to. We knew we could get about 38,000 barrels of annual production. We have 2 years left on our lease. And so for the past 3 to 4 years, I've been constantly scouting for a new location. The armory is...
What are you guys operating at right now in barrels
We'll
annual?
do probably 22,000 this year, and we did 16 last year.
And you think with the next 2 years?
We might breach 30,000 in the next year and a half, maybe 32, 34.
Yeah.
And we have 30 to 32,000 worth of fermentation tanks on the floor right now. We just need to add a couple tanks to go to 38 or 40.
Oh, nice.
But that would push us into a third shift, which is a cultural thing that we don't want to really breach into. Having somebody working overnight in the facility, that's just an internal culture thing for us.
Very nice.
So,
I'm sure your employees respect that.
Yeah, so we've got capacity issues ultimately, but we're always planning several years ahead, and we knew that we would want to build something or find something closer to the city's core. And so we've constantly been scouting, and that's how the armory came about.
So what else can you tell us about the armory project, and why should we be excited about it? I know there's a boutique hotel going in, there's a bigger brewing system, there's going to be an event center. What else is going to get people coming to this? It's going to be great for tourism for sure.
It will be a great tourism magnet, and that's really, the project started with, driving by the building, kind of driving by the building every day for 2.5 years and looking at this central part and thinking, the biggest thing in the brewing space is we need vertical height for fermenters. And fermenters are tall, and we store things and we stack things, and that's the biggest problem with finding an historic building, and I've been through every historic building that has any height to it within 3-mile radius of downtown over the past half a decade or decade. And there's just nothing that works. And so seeing this open space, I thought, well, I'm going to call our real estate agents to see what the state's doing with this thing. Called the state on May 7th, 2017, and the rest is really history. I had kind of run into a high school classmate her and her husband own an architecture firm. They had done some work on Boulevard's big renovation in Kansas City in 2007 timeframe. Also had some staff who had done other brewery work, and so just immediately started engaging them about the prospects of coming on board on the architecture side and scoping out the history of the building. And we didn't get to see inside the building until September 15th. And then we spent 6 months with engineers and architects kind of building out a plan. And then we assembled a competitive bid in response to the RFP on March 15th, 2018.
We all know that's a process in itself.
It is a pain in the rear, and just I think writing the thing was difficult. Assembling the logic of how you present the plan to the committee who was going to make the decision. Natalie's here. Natalie had probably the biggest hand in, raise your hand, Natalie. The biggest hand in helping me put together the package was, like physically putting together a good presentation. And when we walked in with this laser etched wood cover binder that was all color and 130 pages and, of writing and images and renderings and all these things, and our competitor walked in with a binder clip stack of paper that was apparently pretty deficient. It wasn't a hard thing to win. We won by a long shot, I think. And so, but putting together a logic of how do you go from this building to really all the nuts and bolts, and telling the state, who has a very much vested interest in what happens with this property because it's next to the state capitol, and it's partially an image thing for them, but they don't want the thing to fall in on itself or be torn down, and they can't afford to maintain it. So how do you tell them that you're going to be a good steward of this architectural gem that's right next to the city's capital, or the state's capital, which has historically been ignored. And frankly, we've presented and we've created it something that we think is going to breathe new life into the Capitol complex.
And how are you going to be a good steward of that space?
So first off, saving the building, number one. Unfortunately, it's not like a lot of other historic buildings. It was an armory, so it's to an extent dull in its function. It's a beautiful building inside and out. There aren't any relics inside that we can reuse, but saving the structure is the big thing. And secondly, taking the 45th Infantry Division's museum curator and sitting down with him, going through the museum's history or going through the division's history and working on a plan to try to integrate some of that history and kind of honor what's happened with that division, particularly through World War II and the Korean War.
That's wonderful. And
bring some of those elements in. But at the heart of the building, it started with, okay, let's move our brewery there, and we have extra space. So we spent 4 months evaluating different things, office space, different things, and then finally settled on, well, let's put some hotel rooms in here. And so we started with, okay, well, let's put 22 hotel rooms in the Armory building. And then in negotiations with the state, after we won the RFP and negotiating the larger land grab, trying to structure enough parking, it became very apparent that they weren't going to let go of this particular building for us to tear down for parking. So we were able to negotiate the acquisition of 2 more buildings along 23rd, and we have even more space. And so over a period of about 6 to 9 months with myself, my director of sales and marketing, our wives and our architects, talking about this and also visiting other boutique hotel properties around the US, it became very apparent that it might not be in our best interest just to slap hotel rooms onto a brewery. We had the opportunity with all this space and all this other perimeters, this perimeter space, to really change the dynamic of the idea. And what it has morphed into over the past year and a half is it's gone from bolting hotel rooms onto the brewery to building a world-class resort destination around the brewery. And so we're talking 16 hotel rooms in the main building. There's a separate building to the northeast that we call the Villas. It's the Veteran Affairs Administration building. That's going to include 12 larger villas. And at the end of that building is another building that we're tearing down and building, for lack of a better term, and not to sound too goofy or bro-ish, but a Vegas-style pool club with a bar at the end of the Villas building that serves out into the pool club area.
When's Tiesto going to come play? Maybe it's Kygo is more popular these days.
Oh, jeez. I'm sure something of that nature will happen. So it'll be kind of a public-private thing. The hotel pool will be available to hotel guests. You'll be able to come as just a guy or gal from the public and walk in and pay a $20 entry that'll go to your bar tab and hang out at the pool. We've got cabanas and pool service and all kinds of fun things going on. Inside the main building, we have the 16 hotel rooms. On the opposite wing, on the east wing, second floor, we've got about a 3,800, 4,000 square foot full-service restaurant. Above that, we have a 3,800 square foot private event space that's bisectable. Out on the patio deck, the first floor roof, you walk out of the second floor restaurant onto a patio that faces the state capitol.
Oh, wow.
It'll be the largest shaded patio in Oklahoma. It's got a 50-foot wall above it of shade, and after about 1:30 in the afternoon, it's all in the shade, which is really great. And then to cap it all off, my biggest challenge personally in the space and thinking about becoming a restaurant owner and a hotelier is how do we connect these things? On the west wing, we have these hotel rooms, and on the east wing, we have this culinary thing going on. We've got these culinary and hospitality bookends, but I was having a really hard time trying to grasp how we physically integrate the spaces. And then we visited a hotel in San Antonio called Hotel Emma, which is on the grounds of the old Pearl Brewery. And now there's an entire entertainment district built around this hotel. But this hotel was the vision of one of the Pace Pecanisos family heirs. And they built a hotel that is, in my opinion, the greatest hospitality experience on the planet, the best thing I've ever seen on the planet. And we walked out of that space just kind of in awe of what they had done. And we've had to go back to reabsorb. And luckily, the guy who runs the space for the family, the guy who is the president of the hotel, is a friend of a friend. And so we've been able to sit down with Bill Petrella and pick his brain about the history of the hotel and about his experience, his 25 years at Weston prior to coming over to this group and running convention center hotels and running boutique properties and being in charge of boutique brands. And it was a really enlightening experience. So to merge the entities, we took some cues from Hotel Emma, and we have built this inside the main area of the brewery is a 22,000 square foot floor that's 50 foot high, laced with American redwood all along the interior of the decking and these giant bowstring trusses. It's beautiful. And on the north and south end are these huge frame windows. There are 8 windows along each end, and they're 8-10 feet tall. But in that space, we're building a 4,000 square foot glass and steel box that is a lounge that's conditioned, that's a full 14 feet tall. And through the front wall of that lounge, you will look into the production space and through this 105 foot wide and 14 foot tall glass wall, basically. That will be the bar, that will be the lounge, and it is the common thread that visually and aesthetically and texturally and experientially will tie the hotel and the restaurant together. And that's the thing that's probably been the most exciting development in the past 6 to 9 months.
So before, I have maybe a couple more questions for you. I think there's probably a general burning question in the room of how did you guys pivot, or how are you adding this this knowledge of how to run a hotel with traditionally people that are running a brewery? How did you guys pick up that knowledge? How are you utilizing that to make your plans for the Armory project? And then maybe a follow-up question to that would be, how has this vision, obviously we see it to some degree how it's evolved throughout the years, but what were maybe some of the struggles that you've overcome over these years to get to where you guys are today?
Okay. Not in a vacuum is the answer to the first question. And so the first question that the banks always ask is who's going to run and operate the hotel and who's going to run and operate the restaurant. And on the restaurant side, it's not full-blown public knowledge yet, but it will be. If any of you have ever eaten at a Good Egg restaurant, Cheever's, Red Prime, Barrios, Kitchen 324.
Yeah, they're great.
There's a gentleman that was with, and Heather and Keith are amazing visionaries in the community, and I have the highest degree of respect for them. Robert Black is a chef who came on board with their group in the mid-2000s, and after he moved back from the Northeast, his first gig was kind of running and executing the Museum Cafe back in 2004 timeframe, 2005. But went on to work for Heather and Keith Paul as their executive chef and kind of their de facto COO for the past 9 years of the 14-year tenure he had there. He left a year and a half ago, and I knew he was leaving, and I knew I had no desire to learn how to build and execute and run a restaurant. So I went to Robert and said, hey, look, I want you to come on board with us under contract. I don't know what you're doing. That's not the first thing I said. The first thing I said was, how's it going? What are you doing? What's going on with your life?
Pleasantries.
And he and I had connected through the beer business and beer dinners and things, a decade earlier. And so Robert's probably he is definitely the chef that I respect the most in Oklahoma City. I think he's done the most for the culinary scene, frankly, statewide. And he's just a good dude. He's a very humble, just an incredible guy. And so I went to him and said, hey, I'd like you to come on contract with us to help us concept this restaurant, build the menu, build the staff, build the facility, and operate it for 4 months and hand it to me on a silver platter for a contract price, basically. And he said, oh, well, I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to go into three things. I'm going to woodworking full time. I'm going to start a restaurant concept I've had in my mind for 10 years, or I'm going to start a restaurant consulting practice, but I've given myself a year to decide, and we're only 2 months into that year. And I said, that's fine, okay. And he pushed me off, and he's like, you need to go talk to Heather and Keith, you need to go talk to Hal Smith, you need to go talk to Sodexo.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I respectfully, chase those things, and I sat down with Keith and a couple other people, but all the while in the back of my mind knowing that really wasn't what I wanted to do. And 4 months later, Robert called me and said, hey, I'm really excited, let's go to lunch, I got some new ideas. Sat me down. I started thinking about the fact that there's not really a restaurant consultant in Oklahoma that has the breadth and depth of expertise I do, and I think I could really help people. It's not, hey, I think I could go make a lot of money. Robert's thing was, hey, I think I can help people. That just speaks to truly to the core of Robert as an individual. And so he starts telling me about how he's going to hire all this talented staff, and they're going to execute these restaurant concepts for people, and that he's wants to explore our deal. And I'm like, yes, it finally came back to my original proposal. Thank you. So Robert's been on board with us since last summer.
Great.
Robert's driving the restaurant, all the culinary concepts within the venue. There's also a 2,700-foot speakeasy underneath the Villas building that'll be a private event space as well as a speakeasy space. That'll be open on limited availability.
Fun.
Yeah, it will be. That'll be where all of the really, really rare things you always dreamed of would be, beer-wise. And
on the Vegas, pool party, no, you have to kind of clarify the
no territory reserved stouts, on the pool. But the hotel side to me, and particularly and potentially ignorantly, as my opinion has always been, the hotel was going to be the less complicated thing of those two, of the hotel and the restaurant. After visiting Hotel Emma and about a dozen other, probably closer to 20 boutique properties in the past year around the U.S. and really digging into them, not just existing as a guest, going around and taking pictures of, materials and window builds and how does this flow here? Hey, show me through your event space, let me go through your kitchen, really nerdy things, so I can bring back intel and we can start to facilitate better conversations with the architects and the designers. But the hotel to me is I've always envisioned as a less complicated thing, at least early on. For me, however, as I've learned more, in my opinion, there are crappy and good hotels, right? Let's say some percentage of all hotels are crappy and good ones. And then there are excellent hotels, and the excellent hotels might comprise 20% of the hotels in the world. And then there are exceptional hotels, life-changing exceptional hotels. And those hotels comprise maybe 1.5% of the hotels in the world. The line between an excellent hotel and an exceptional hotel is almost indistinguishable. Like, you can feel it as a guest, but if you went to try to evaluate what is this hotel doing that this other hotel isn't that makes it exceptional instead of just excellent. That line and that gap, that fuzzy area, is the most difficult thing to evaluate. And so that's where we're spending a lot of time in other hotels, learning from other operators, trying to ensure that what we build is truly something different, unique, and not just unique, but we want the service experience. We want your bed to be exceptional. I want you to walk out of the bathroom going, that's the coolest, cleanest, most functional and appealing hotel bathroom I've ever been in.
I want to order room service just so I can eat in my bathroom.
Right. We'll make sure to extra bleach your bathroom before then. But so those are some of the current challenges. And so we've looked at partnering with some operational guys, but the reality is that there's not a flag out there like a Marriott or a Westin that wants a 28-room hotel, right? Even somebody like Paul Corey that owns the Ambassador in Tulsa and Oklahoma City, he doesn't want to mess with something like that, and he's under a Marriott flag. So he's got that allegiance. So we won't be under a flag. We are in the process of recruiting a director-level, C-level executive for the hotel and hospitality umbrella as a whole, but that person's core competencies will be baked in or based in 10 to 20 years worth of hotel experience. And so we have a really good headhunter out of Dallas. That's all they do is executive hotel recruitment. And so we're working with them to bring that person on board over a year in advance of actually launching the hotel in March of 2021, or launching everything in 2021. So that's how we get there with those two components, is not in a vacuum and bringing in really, really smart people to tell us how to do it.
That's great. So before we jump into Q&A, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before jumping in?
Man, we could talk for days, and sorry we talk so much about beer and not about.
We've got enough beer for probably at least another hour, right?
Entrepreneurship. So yeah, I'm stick around as long as you guys want. A lot of people always want to know in the startup sense and as an entrepreneur what challenges and what roadblocks and what hurdles you came through. Having had 5 years worth of experience investing other people's money at the onset of my career and doing a lot of deal work, frankly, and executing deal work, I had the advantage of witnessing 400 or so companies and individuals come across my desk over a period of about 5 years and evaluating deals and structuring deals investing money, helping run businesses, turn them around, and shut them down, frankly. And we did plenty of that. I mean, we've had to shut businesses down, and that's obviously, the non-exciting thing about the venture side. But the reality is that if you make 100 investments, 70 of them are going to fail, 20 of them are going to be, marginal successes. The other
Dogs.
10, out of the other 10 are going to be great successes, and you're going to sell 3 of them. And in my 5 years that we were there, we sold 1 by the time I left, and we had made less than 100 investments. So I kind of felt lucky to have a really broad exposure to people's mistakes and to people's successes. And then leaving MetaFund and going over to I2E to effectively act as a consultant and a proponent of a startup tech company to help them raise money from VCs that I used to co-invest with, was the next step in my evolution away from finance. And I eventually came back and did some other things. But somebody told me, one of my early mentors told me early on that, in his opinion of my work product and my drive, that I was going to eventually, he kept telling me, someday you're going to find something that you're passionate about that you're going to start a business with. And I just blew it off and off and off and off. But I would say, I had a big advantage that a lot of entrepreneurs don't have, and that's watching other people fail, like really intimately watching them fail, like watching them put their life savings on the line, and watching them put everything they've worked for, career or idea-wise on the line, and watching them succeed as well. So, a couple of tidbits, we talked a little bit about it at the last time I saw you. If I can shed, or drive any little nuggets of wisdom to anybody that's working in the startup realm, my first nugget for anyone always is to know your business better than anyone. It's to know it better than your potential investors, know it better than, your current investors, your potential investors, know it better than any distribution partner, know it better than anybody, because you just should know your business better. And frankly, you're in a better position if you can proceed with strategy on the fly rather than having to try to fill in gaps in your business model. The other thing is, hire people who are going the same direction you're going. One of the biggest challenges we faced at COOP early on was, we brought people in who wanted to work at a brewery. And working at a brewery sounds really, really sexy until you get sprayed with yeast out of a tank that, you forgot to close a tri-clamp on, and you're covered in yeast or hops. And
working at a brewery sounds really sexy until you work at a brewery.
Until you get burned or something like that. And there's a lot of non-sexy things. And frankly, at COOP, we probably have a lot more non-sexy things than most breweries, because we run it as a very methodical business. So we have accountants on staff, and I hired a business intelligence analyst. Who here, name a brewery that you know of that has a business intelligence analyst? But that was one of my big objectives for last year, was to hire an analyst to do a lot of the analytics work that I wanted to be part of our organization.
Rapid fire question.
Yep.
What types of programs is your business intelligence analyst using?
Right now we have an enterprise level QuickBooks that we run all of our accounting on. We have a manufacturing accounting software called Ecos that is liquid specific. It's built for the brewing business that dovetails into enterprise. We have crystal reporting capability out of there. We also have set reports out of there, and then we dovetail all that into analytics packages that Derek's built. Right now we're just running Excel. We're probably going to upgrade to Tableau.
Who just got bought by Salesforce.
Yep. And we don't use Salesforce. We use a different CRM system that's called VIP, but it's brewery specific, and it's kind of a stalwart in the brewing business and the distribution space. But yeah, Tableau. Awesome. And I grew up using, on the financial side and financial modeling and reporting, using Hyperion and Essbase, and larger and even PeopleSoft and large enterprise level accounting systems. Yeah. But it's not that sophisticated. But I would say that for a brewery, we're probably doing analytics to the level that breweries like the size of Lagunitas and New Belgium and Sam Adams do.
Nice.
I'm pretty confident that those are the skill sets that we have internally.
So any other nuggets before we jump into Q&A?
No, I can spew things all day long, but I think it'd probably be more beneficial for you guys just to bring anything up you are curious about, and I'll be glad to stick around.
Yeah.
As long as you want.
We're glad to have you. I've got about a quarter of my beer left, but
still at half.
We've got some extras up here. We can always get a cold one from back there. But does anyone out here have any questions they'd like to ask? Let's go first to Dennis.
How do you find those? What advice would you say for other businesses that are trying to find those like-minded individuals that would be a good fit?
And also, do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. How do you find like-minded individuals and people who are kind of going the same direction you're going? And to finish the other part, early on, we had a really tough existence for the first 5 years. It was a pretty miserable time. We had 1 or 2 full-time employees, and one of my business partners was working there full-time, but Mark and I didn't quit our day jobs. We were working there on the weekends. I was taking a company public at the time, less than a year in, and building an investor relations department in a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was working 70, 80, 100-hour weeks during the IPO, and then going on the weekends and trying to process the accounting for this meager little brewing business we had. And not everybody. Our biggest division point was moving to the new facility. When we moved, we were doing a lot of things that we told all the staff, hey, we're not going to do these things anymore. This is not acceptable in the new space. We're investing a lot of money. Our protocol, our process, our culture has to change. And frankly, we were miserable at the other building, so it was really good that we weren't doing some of those things. We weren't working in miserable environments. We had no culture at the other building. And so shifting to the new space, we made a priority to, and I think one thing, and I'll divert over real quick, is that we make a big deal about culture internally, but we talk about it oftentimes, and I think people infer that you can drive culture at the top of your organization. I think you can drive responsibility and accountability, but your people are the ones that ultimately build the culture, because they're the ones that bring the dynamic to your organization. We have 32 people, up by 33 people now on staff, full-time equivalents, and 29 of those are full-time, 30 are full-time. And this organization is completely different than it was 4 years ago when we had 7 full-time people. And that is what's allowed us to build the culture that we built. But taking care of our people is what we do as a management team, myself and then my 3 management level people basically. We're driving that by giving them opportunities and making sure they feel appreciated. And so they're building the culture, we're just facilitating it. However, getting back to the question of how you find the right people, is you've got to ensure that your hiring practice is transparent, number one, that they know what they're walking into, that they know the type of organization. And you don't just do that by open-ended giving them the opportunity to ask questions. We've had to refine our hiring process to the point where it's pretty rigorous in the final interviews. We typically will have, we've had up to 170 applicants for a position. And we narrow it down to 10 interviews or less, and then 2 dinnerviews, as we call them. And our dinnerviews consist of, it used to consist, when there were only 7 of us, it consisted of all the staff and their spouses. Now it's, so you go through an interview, you make it to the final cut to 2 people, but in that process, what we're focused on is giving them a pretty unabashed history of the brewery and a pretty direct insight into where we're going. Like, what are we doing as an entity? Because a lot of people are coming into brewing spaces and going, oh, I want to work for the weirdest sour brewery that's creating the most limited exclusive release beers. Well, that's not COOP. You want to do that, then you're going to need to go work somewhere else, because you're not going to be happy here. Exactly. What's that? Yeah. So we have limited release beers, and we have specialty programs that are unrivaled in the state from a quality and consistency standpoint. We brewed the first barrel-aged beer in Oklahoma. We're the only brewery that from the start, we're the first brewery to can all of our beers. We've got great programs, but if you want to be part of, if you want to be part of COOP, you need to understand that this beer pays all the bills. This is half of our volume. This is like 48% of our volume, depending on the quarter. But this beer pays it all, and it's going to suck if you're a brewer to get up on the stand and brew this beer 17 times a week. You're not going to like that at times. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have the ID series, and these are all one-off beers. None of these beers get replicated in the same fashion. That's why they're all numbered. They're not a fancy brand name like Fly Me Away, because we can't be that creative, and there are like 190 million trademarks. So we came out with this id series, which is a reference to Sigmund Freud's id, which is like the most instinctual aspect of the psyche. But you want to be creative, this is where you have it. And we have the second largest barrel program in the state. We have 700 wooden barrels in 2 different temp controlled rooms in one of our warehouses. And we've got creative capability, and we love that stuff, but ensuring the transparency is there, ensuring they have visibility into the business, letting them meet other people and letting them experience the culture. But knowing where you're going is really important to relay to people. If you're going to be a widget maker, or if you're going to be a technology or software provider, are you going to operate, is your goal to, there's a great example of 2 brothers here in town, if any of you are familiar with Sandeep and Peesh Patel.
Yeah.
Sandeep and Peesh are brothers. Peesh built this giant enterprise that he sold for $40 million. Sandeep runs a really small boutique software collaboration firm called Cage. And those things are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And I don't know all the history between the brothers, but I know Sandeep better than I know Peesh. But I know that Sandeep didn't stay with Peesh through the development of the big company that they built. Sandeep left. And, he's over here building something small and more boutique. If you had, probably because he wanted to, is my guess. You'd have to ask him. But that kind of diversion, that's not what you want. You don't want to bring somebody on and then go, here's your trajectory. Here's our trajectory, and you're going to stay with us until about right here, and then you realize that this is not for me, because you made a massive investment in that person, and they've made an investment in you. They've given up an alternative pathway in their career, and I take that very personally. I take hiring more so as this person is making a sacrifice. As tough as our decision is to hire people, it's the most difficult thing that I do, and I don't hire many people anymore because I have 3 management execs, and then I've got accounting and business intelligence, and those are the only people that report directly to me. And so I just don't hire many people, but I'm going to hire 3 or 4 more people, but all of the rest of the 95 people we're going to hire in the next 24 months, I'm not hiring them. Like, that's just not, we have delineated areas of responsibility. Transparency, pay people what they are worth, not what you think you can get away with paying them. That's a big deal.
I love how you, I love how you have stressed several times in this conversation that you, as well as your hiring managers and execs, are able to set aside their ego to hire people that are smarter than them in whatever particular niche. Or I think it's also kind of appropriate that you have this beer called id as well that kind of complements the ego that you guys are willing to set aside. So that's wonderful. I just wanted to say that before jumping to the next question. I think.
Yeah, and I'll make one other point in that transparency process. Our dinner view now consists of myself, typically, whoever the divisional head is, whether it's Lauren, Blake, or Sean, whether it's admin, operations, or sales and marketing, their spouses, my spouse, and then a couple of key employees from that division and their spouse if they want to come. So it's usually a table of 10 to 12 people. And we have dinner, and our goal is we go out to the bar with just staff, out to a bar at 6 o'clock. We have 2 cocktails or so, or however many you want to have, or beers or whatever. And we have a couple cocktails, we talk a little bit of business, but more like, what are you doing on the weekends? What's your passion outside of work? Because I want to ensure as an employer that you get to do those things. And then we go to dinner and the spouses show up, and it's a 3-hour session of BSing, and at the very end we go, okay, so now's where it gets really awkward. Someone at the table typically has a knife by that point, and they spin it, and we'll go, and while they're spinning the knife, someone else is going, okay, so clockwise or counterclockwise? And they're like, the person's like, what? And like, clockwise. And like, okay, well, now where it gets really awkward, we're all going to ask you a question or a sub-question or a sub-sub-question, and then we're going to go around the table and I'll ask you all these questions, and then you're going to have a chance to ask us questions, and then we're going to unceremoniously ask you to leave and talk about you for the next hour. And so that's where it gets pretty, I mean, we learn a lot from people in this non-typical, non-job evaluation. We've already vetted them on the technical merits, you know. I want to know how they're going to fit in the organization, you know, and not everybody fits perfectly. We've hired people that don't fit perfectly, but we've also embraced that, you know. Those are some of the funnest people.
That's great. That's great. So I think we had a question back here from Charn and then Kyle.
I wanted actually to dovetail off the last answer you gave, because you guys started with the accidental perfect storm of a business person, a brewery focus person, a marketing person. You had all those things that come together to build from, but then you've lost some of those partners along the way. So when it comes to managing people and having the right people in place, how did you recover from losing a founder or a really massive cog in all of the aspects of running a business?
If you could repeat that. Or
Sure. How do we, you know, we started the company with 3 people, and over time, 2 of them have exited the business. And, you know, really the triumvirate to start, as Kyle said, was myself from a financial background, JD from kind of a marketing and brand building background, and Mark from the operations background. Mark was an architect, but he was the home brewer. You know, he was probably the one with, he and I on a mechanical mind are probably very much peers. He's probably like math smarter than I am. Math is hard, so I don't do math very often, but I can always look up formulas on Google. And
Excel.
But how do you recover from people exiting the business? And, you know, I think the velocity of a business's trajectory and success, or really its pathway, starts to get set by external factors. And there are things you can do to ensure that you're trying to keep up, both personally and or from the founding team. But there are always deficiencies everywhere in the business, right? Even with 3 people covering the 3 most important triangles. And if you read books about startup strategy, a lot of times they'll argue that of those 3 entities, the operation or the bodies, the operational body, the financial body, and the marketing mind, essentially, all 3 of those bodies, those 3 of those heads, one person can occupy 2 of those bodies, but the one crossover you cannot occupy in the same brain is the marketing and the financial piece. And that is very, very much true. You can have these 3 areas of responsibility and cover it with 2 people, but one person cannot, like there does not exist on the planet. There may exist, but it's just not common to have the level of intelligence and the level of exposure that you need to run those 2 facets. So when one facet out of the 3 drops out, you know, it's like, well, now when this facet on the operational side is leaving, then I step in to fill that piece. And then when this other facet, and that was pretty easy for me. And then when this other facet leaves, it was a hole that needed to be filled, and there were places we needed to fill skill sets underneath that role, and we were always lacking for the capability to fill staff roles, to fund them, frankly, and to bring on enough people. And so, you know, the last exit for us was the marketing and sales side, and my objective there was, hey, this business is growing at a trajectory that, you know, I can't fill this gap. I know that. So I'm going to bring in somebody that's far smarter than I am and that, you know, can take the business to the next level. I was fine taking the business to the next level on the operational and the financial side, but not on the marketing and sales side. And the person that we have in that role now is the single greatest hire that I've ever made. And so I think part of it, Kyle, is luck. You know, we lucked into this hire. You know, he wasn't looking for a job, and he took a pay cut to come here, and he left a $250 million a year company to come sling beer for us. But he had experience managing a sales force of 40 people covering 90 countries, you know, in major chain accounts, which we knew was forthcoming with the law changes. I knew we were going to have to sell beer to a chain of homelands, to 108 homelands in Oklahoma, and 194 billion Walmarts and 54 Walgreens. Chain business was important to us, or was going to be important, and it just so happened that. So you have to, the biggest thing I think in filling gaps at the management level is to very humbly analyze where your deficiencies are as an organization, and not to get too caught up in thinking that you can fill those gaps. For the longest time, I was the accountant. I did all the regulatory work at the federal and state level in 6 states. I ran all the taxes. I managed some of the production schedule. I ordered all the raw materials. I did all the reviews for all the operational team and the sales and marketing teams. I set the sales and marketing bonuses. I did all these things, even though I had people in those spheres, but that's not a way to survive. You need to bring compartmentalized expertise, even if you have to pay for it.
That's hard to do, right?
It is absolutely hard to do. But pay and benefits are one of those things that there is a survival aspect to a startup where you just physically and financially cannot do that. But it should always be your objective that if I'm going to be successful and I can get into the black, if you really want to build culture in a team and you want to build expertise, start planning very early on for the moment that you are in the black and how you're going to allocate those resources. For COOP, every single dollar that we've ever made has gone back into the business. We spent $1.8 million on a new canning line and a couple of new fermenters last year in preparation for the law changes, because we were going to be able to sell beer in 3,900 new venues between grocery, convenience, and drugstores. But we knew that we weren't going to be able to keep up production-wise. We knew that we weren't going to be able to keep up staffing-wise. We knew that our distribution partnerships were not adequate, that we were going to have to reroute and reestablish and define our distribution partnerships. So, finding talent, compensating them, giving them the environment to succeed is really critical for me personally. I've been in jobs where I haven't enjoyed it, and I don't take any job in my career, and I have a very ping pong career through different industries, but every single facet of every job that I performed has been something that's built the foundation to where I am now. But I never want to be in a position that I don't enjoy. And I'm 40, and I've had the luxury or the unfortunate circumstance of being in a couple places where I haven't wanted to be and not being able to get out soon enough. And I never want to be an inhibiting factor to prevent one of my people from exiting. And what I tell people when they come on board, we do this expectations management meeting that's about 3 hours long, and it's just me and my 3 division heads, and we take the new hire out for lunch, and then we come back and we continue, but we talk about all 4 of us have this list of 10 things that we think are important to us. But another thing that I focus on telling people is, I want you to enjoy your time here, and if you spend your lifetime here and the rest of your career here, great. That's not my expectation. My expectation is that you're probably going to exit, or some number of you are going to exit. But what I want out of your exit is for you to be able to look at me and tell me that your time here was valuable and it was productive and it was fruitful for you personally and professionally. If we've done that, then if our turnovers, if our attrition rate is 49.4 months instead of 89.9 months, I'm probably pretty happy with that.
That's great.
Because I know if you were happy here, you were productive, and happy people contribute more. That's the bottom line.
I think, Charn, did you still have a question?
Yeah.
Well, if we want, we can take things one-on-one afterwards. I think we have time for maybe 2 more quick questions and answers. Yes.
Do you use any long-term contracts in your input costs for barley and hops
Just
and things like
just
that?
for hops.
Just for hops.
We contract hops out depending on the varietal, and we use about a dozen varietals a year. We contract hops typically between 2 and 3 years. We have some varietals that go to 4 that are more limited, that we want to hedge a little more. That's a tough business, contracting hops and hedging.
Do you foresee, with the recent rains, do you see any impacts to increase in production costs with the recent?
I don't think so, because as flat as beer is and as flat as production is over the past 24 months, It was a big conversation last year at Hop Harvest. I wasn't there, but I heard rumblings, and I've talked to some of our brokers. Even if we have a high incidence of rot or bugs and mites this year because of the moisture, the crop, last year's crop was the biggest hop crop ever. And last year, the United States became the largest producer of hops in the world over Germany for the first time ever. So with supply and the contraction of the industry and plateauing of the beer volume in general, I wouldn't be worried about hop shortage or any material differential in pricing. It'd be nothing like, the Yakima house fire in 2007, the Yakima hop warehouse fire in 2007, and the bad crops in Europe that happened in 06 that led to the giant spikes in 07 and 08, or really 07 and 08 through 2010, 11, where pretty much everything tripled in price. I wouldn't be worried about something like that, just hopefully no fires. But
well, thanks for that. Yeah. We got time for one more question. John?
And you make me go last every time.
Save the best for last.
I appreciate you taking your time to talk to us today.
Yeah,
I think
no problem.
You have a really unique perspective, having been in venture before and now having your own business. My question to you is, if you could make one change that founders or local ecosystem is doing right now, you could just snap your fingers and make it happen, what would it be?
Oh man.
If you could make one change that local ecosystems or founders could do, what would that be?
In Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma, if you could snap your fingers and have your wish.
That's a delicate answer.
We can.
I think one of the things that, and I won't get on too much of a soapbox because I'm in the middle of negotiating, economic development incentives from multiple organizations, and the Armory is an expensive project. It's $28 million. It works on its own accord, but it's also an historic property. So we're funding. Of the $28 million we're going to spend, $6 million in cash of that is from federal and state historic preservation tax credits. That's free money that we get that we don't have to bring to the table or borrow. And there are other incentive programs. I think if I can get on a soapbox eventually after we do the Armory and everything is kind of settled down, in a second career, if I wanted to be the new Ed Shadid, I would talk really about the state and the cities, their propensity to focus on out-of-state recruitment versus in-state build. I see a lot. I've been, my venture work was very focused on the community development side, so we had very specific community development focal points. We did venture work, we made investments, we did tax credit deals. We built the tax credit structure for the Cold Court Hotel. That's how I met Paul Corey. It was a cold call when I walked into his office 15 years ago to try to convince him to use Newmarket's tax credits on the Cold Court Hotel. Well, the Cold Court Hotel also used community development block grant funds. It also used a bunch of city funds. My community development heart really drives me to believe that there are just as many potential consumers of dollars that the city and the state have available that can make just as much of an economic impact and create a differential sustained economy or a growingly differential economy in Oklahoma versus those dollars going to Boeing or to any other out-of-state firm and trying to, quote, recruit them here when they were probably already going to move here. I would route more state and city dollars into local businesses that are born and growing here. And this is not something that I really had on my mind until recently in the past year and a half, working on this Armory project and getting more exposure to a lot of things that I have pretty deep knowledge of through my prior career and a lot of exposure to economic development incentives. But a lot of that money goes to companies that weren't born here. Granted, they're employing people, or in employment, education, recruitment of bodies to the state of Oklahoma is very important. I'm not necessarily completely discounting where those dollars go and how they're used, but I think entities like I2E and the facilitation of the Angel Seed Fund that we built when I was there back in 05 through 07, and various other independent organizations that are building seed funds are becoming more and more important And those aren't public dollars, those are private dollars, but that's the private reciprocal. And luckily, I think with the success we've seen out of these nested areas of technology in Oklahoma, whether it be medical device research coming out of OMRF or the PHF Research Park, or commercialization of college, research, companies like We Go Look. You guys had Robin on here, and I've run into Kenneth twice in the past couple weeks, and I ran into Robin and Ken the other morning. And I've known Ken for a long time, and I don't really know Robin, but we crossed paths. But I mean, that's a great success story, and success stories like We Go Look are going to drive, number one, it's going to drive attention from local investors to actually realize, hey, there's an opportunity here. There are opportunities here. I think that traction has increased dramatically since I left the venture space in 2007. So that's been a massive positive development. But I think public dollars could use some revision and reorientation to local companies.
I think that's a great way to wrap things up. On these shows, we love to tell these success stories, and we love to build this library of Oklahoma success stories that we can share, not just with our local community, but around the world with the Startup Grind community as a whole. So let me offer you a cheers, and let's give you a round of applause.
Thanks.
Daniel, everyone.
Cheers.